Muted. There we go. Unmute myself. All right. Hello and welcome everyone from around the world to another PM Square live stream. I'm Ryan Dolley. I'm trying to remember my title. It recently changed. I'm the Vice President of Technology at PM Square. And I'm really excited to see everybody here today. I think we have a really cool topic that you're going to get a lot of value out of. I certainly spent a long time trying to figure out what's the best stuff I can show you for keeping Cognos up and running. But before we dive into it, let's do a little bit of roll call here. I see a lot of chat already. You guys know I love it when you're talking in the chat. It's what keeps these fresh, keeps them fun, makes it different from a boring old webinar. And people from all around the world. So, I mean, we've got all over the United States, Oregon. I see Larry in San Diego. We've got, of course, our contingency from Chicago phoning in. I'm coming to you live from outside of Detroit, Michigan. And then a lot of our international regulars. So, the Netherlands, Norway. We've got Martin here from Deutschland. Always good to see you here, Martin. I really feel like when all this is over, that I'm going to be able to, well, all this meaning the coronavirus situation, that I'm going to take like a European trip, and I'm going to have a lot of people to visit, and we're going to talk a lot about Cognos, probably drive my wife a little crazy. So good to see everybody here. So today's topic is how to keep your Cognos environment happy, healthy, and performing well. And so what we're going to cover is going to run the gamut. So some of you who, I know we have a number of IBM champions in the audience today who've been doing Cognos for a long time. Some of the stuff I'm going to cover, you guys probably know. Some of the stuff I'm going to cover, you may not. But we're going to be kind of casting a wide net to talk about topics to keep Cognos healthy. We're going to be looking in the admin console. We're going to be diving into Cognos configuration. We're looking in TXT files and settings to set in them to unlock different things in Cognos. So, if you're used to coming in these live streams and me futzing around data modules for an hour, that's not what we're doing today. Today we're going deep, and we're looking at some really kind of topics to keep Cognos humming along and keep your queries performing well and your system stable. So, with that said, Nick, hi from the UK. A lot of beard talk. So when it comes to the beard, what I like to say is, if Cognos Paul Mendelsohn and his mighty beard, if he is Cognos Gandalf, my hope is to be can I be Cognos Radagast, right? For you Lord of the Rings nerds out there. And nice Miles Davis pick. Yeah, thank you. That it's this shoulder, right there. Yeah, that was a wedding gift from a friend of ours in Kenya, who mailed it to us from Kenya. It was in pretty battered shape when it showed up, but it made it, and I'm happy to hang that on my wall. So hi to Gabby in Nairobi. Hopefully I get to see you again, my friend. All right. So without further ado, let's get into it. So. Let me switch this here. Oh, last thing I want to hit before we get rolling. You should hopefully, over the course of the next few live streams, start to notice some improvements in our presentation. And the reason for that, and the reason I wanted to bring it up is when we did our AMA, Holiday Analytics AMA, a month ago or so now, one of the questions someone asked me was AMD or Intel. And I'm happy to report that this weekend I put the finishing touches on my new Ryzen 9 5950X build. So that's a 16 core 32 thread processor. And actually there was stuff we wanted to do on live streaming that we kind of had a hard time doing before because I had an old out of date processor that couldn't handle it. So you should see some new graphics coming in and ability for us to have guests and like live guest video and that sort of stuff coming up in the next few live streams. So that's a very exciting thing for me to, plus my video games really scream now. So that's cool too. So with that said, let's jump into it. Greg Jungles, I like the Go Lions license plate. Yeah, thanks, Greg. So for those of you who don't know, obviously I'm from Detroit. I'm a Lions fan for you NFL people out there. And if you look over here, this was my license. I lived in Wisconsin for 10 years, and this is a custom Packers license plate that spells out "Go Lions." So luckily, people in Wisconsin are really nice, and I never really they just like thought it was funny. Plus, the Lions are really bad, so it's harmless. They don't get offended. Okay, here we go. So let's jump into it. All right, so what are we going to go through today? There's a lot of topics to cover that I want to get through. And what we're going to start with is the classic Cognos question. I get this a lot. I've always got this a lot. I get it a lot to this day. Everybody wants to know, and that is, where is this guy? Here we go. Let me open this up for you. So sizing out your environment. How many of the RAMs do I need? How many of the cores do I need? That sort of stuff. We get this question all the time. And actually, our go-to guide for this is available online. If you go to our analytics blog, you can see this. It's an article by Chris Chapman, who is on our new cloud data team here at PM Square. So we recently did a little reorg. We have a cloud data team that focuses on moving analytics and data workloads to the cloud or creating new ones on the cloud. So, stuff like Snowflake and Amazon Redshift, and also migrating Cognos from on-prem to either IBM's Cognos Cloud SaaS offering, or, if you're an Azure shop or an AWS shop, moving Cognos onto those platforms. And Chris is on that team. And Chris wrote in April of last year this awesome article about Cognos sizing, t-shirt sizing, to try to keep it simple. I see Paul points out Chris was Consultant of the Year at PM Square. So kudos to Chris. Yeah, he was Consultant of the Year. Every year we give out some internal awards, and Chris, Chris won that award. So if you take a look at this, you can see the sizing that we have up here. So there's two ways to approach it, right? There's from the how many users do I have and what are they going to do? That's a question sometimes people ask. The flip side question that people sometimes ask is, if I build a server this size, how many people will it support, right? So this document approaches it from both angles. You can look at it and see, okay, right, the kind of user-based starting point where you would say, okay, up to 100 named users, what are they doing? How big of a server do I need, right? All the way up to, 1 to 2K named users, what sort of servers do I need? The flip side of that is, okay, if I build a server of this size, what type of use case can it support, right? So I would encourage you to go here and check this out. What I would say is that we don't recommend that you do anything under than 4 cores for an application server. And we don't recommend you do anything over than, anything under 32 gigs of RAM, right? That's kind of just what we say. Now, it's not that you can't get away with that. You can, but then you start to get into kind of use case dependent, you kind of start to get into use case dependent things. Like, can you get away with less than that? Yes, you can, but it depends on what you're doing. But as a baseline, I would say 4 cores, 32 gigs of RAM is where you're going to want to start, especially if you intend on using any of the new stuff, right? So if you are going to want to use dashboards and data modules, and you're going to have data sets and all of that good stuff, that's where you really, I would recommend from my perspective that you start. Now you'll notice here, like extra small, 2 CPU cores and minimum 32 gigs of RAM. So it's not that you can't get away with it, but my personal, if you were to engage, if I were your consultant and you asked me that, I would say, guys, let's not do anything under 4. Or let's get a Ryzen 9 5950X and we'll do 16. Okay. So that's the first thing I wanted to talk about. Okay. Now, shifting from how big should my environment be to, okay, I'm installing Cognos. What sort of settings should I set to Cognos? Let's take a look at that. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to take a look here, and we're actually going to look into the settings that you have in Cognos config. Okay, so One of the first questions that I get asked has to do with things like how many like settings on the WebSphere Liberty profile, for example. That's a big one that gets asked. So people will say, okay, I installed Cognos, and you look under IBM Cognos Services, IBM Cognos, maximum memory for WebSphere. Here you can see 8192 is the default setting. Sometimes people want to bump this up, and they say, well, if I have a big server, why don't I increase this setting here? And really what I would recommend that you leave this as the default unless you really have a massive server. The default here used to be for whatever, half of 8192. And we would at that point recommend that you raise it to 8192 as a default. But this is what it is out of the box now when you install Cognos. And we don't recommend you change this, again, unless you have a really huge server. Now, what does this control? This is really controlling the parts of Cognos that don't have to do with query execution, okay? So this is the actual website that is Cognos. And that's why you're generally not going, if like, hey, Cognos is slow, this is not really the first place you're going to go to look to bump this up, right? If queries are slow, I wouldn't recommend you look here. I really wouldn't recommend you change this unless you really, we're talking, hey, we got a 32 core server with, 256 gigabytes of RAM, and we're serving thousands of users. Then maybe we want to start to look at bumping this up. But otherwise, I wouldn't touch it. The next thing that I get asked a lot, and actually, if you go back to 2015, I think on my personal blog, I wrote an article about this, and I think this is kind of what got my personal blog on the Cognos map, is it just has to do with this report server execution mode setting. So you can see 64-bit and 32-bit here. There is a lot of misconceptions about what this means, okay? So first of all, there's two query services. Well, now there's three, and we'll talk about the third one a lot over the course of this presentation. But classically, there were two query services in Cognos. There's CQM and DQM, right? And CQM was introduced with maybe ReportNet, and is kind of the longest running query service in Cognos. And then DQM came out in Cognos 10. And that is, CQM runs on 32-bit and DQM runs in 64-bit. And so a lot of times what people would do is they would go and say, okay, well, I want to say I'm doing DQM, so I want to set it to 64-bit, or I'm doing CQM, I want to set it to 32-bit. That seems like it would be cut and dried like that, but it's really not. So here's the way this works. If you set this to 64-bit, what you're doing is you are putting it into 64-bit only mode, okay? It cannot process 32-bit queries. It cannot execute CQM queries. It can't. Here's our Cognos sandbox at PM Square. It's set to 64-bit. We have no CQM content. We have none of that stuff in here, right? So we can confidently set it to 64-bit, knowing that there's no CQM, traffic, no CQM queries. However, if you've had Cognos for a long time, you'll probably see that this is set to 32-bit, in which case the same rule does not apply. 64-bit means 64-bit only. 32-bit means 32-bit and 64-bit. So that's not clear at all here. They should really rename this to like dual query mode and DQM only mode or something like that. If you come in here and this says 32-bit, my recommendation is don't change it because you probably, you've had Cognos for a while. There's a great chance that you have some DQM or CQM 32-bit queries. And if you change this to 64-bit, you're going to make it so that those queries can no longer run, right? So I would leave it as 32-bit. Now, you might say, well, if I switch it to 64-bit, aren't I going to get a big performance enhancement? And the reality is no, because when you leave it to 32-bit, keep in mind, it can still process 64-bit queries. So you're not losing anything. Now, the situations where this really came into play um, was when you had dynamic cubes. If you have dynamic cubes, which probably most of you don't, but if you do, those can only run on a 64-bit server. So that is something that that is definitely that you have in there that you're going to want to, if you have those, then you need that, but otherwise it's not necessary. The other thing is, so the report server execution mode on 64-bit, if you are creating very large CSVs, for example, sometimes setting this to 64-bit, like I've been told, can theoretically help, but I've never actually tested that out. I don't know, but that is something that I was told at some point in my career that lodged in my head. Your mileage may vary on that one. But overall, if it says 32, unless you have a really compelling reason to switch it over to 64, I wouldn't do it. Now, if you're installing Cognos fresh for the first time, I'm not sure if this defaults to 64-bit now, but if it doesn't, I would set it to 64-bit just so that you'd never dive into the CQM mode, right? If you don't have any CQM content, don't start creating it. And if you set this to 64-bit, you'll make it impossible for that content to process, which in a way is actually good because you don't want to accidentally make it anyway. Okay. I see a lot of good conversations about DQM maximum Java heap size. We'll get into that, Martin. One of the best things about these live streams is the stuff that you guys talk about in the chat. It's more valuable sometimes, I think, than the content that I present. Is just the level of knowledge that people bring to these live streams. It's really astonishing to me. So Jerry's talking about, as you come up with an environment where batch jobs were hung in wait status, IBM recommended the WLP JVM to 8 gig at least, but never higher than 16. Yeah, that's absolutely. Okay. So those are right off the bat two things that I've gotten a lot of questions about over the course of my career that you're going to see in Cognos Config right away, and you may wonder, what should I set there? Those are our recommendations. Now, when it comes to increasing the query performance, what you're first going to want to look at is the query service settings. So where you're going to access those is if you go into Cognos and you go into the Manage menu and the Administration console. And actually, let me turn on... I have this SwordSoft mouse track. For those of you who do demos, I know we've got some demo guys on the who are watching. This SwordSoft mouse track is like $2. It's great. So you'll notice when I click on Manage and then Administration console, this is of course going to open the Cognos 11 admin console. This is where your query service settings are going to be. So what you're going to want to do, if you go into Configuration, and of course, now I'm, where is it? Dispatchers and services. And you look at an individual dispatcher, you'll notice that that dispatcher has query service. And when you click here, you're going to get into the query service settings. And here you can set all sorts of things about your query service. Now, the key things that you're going to want to set in here to improve your performance, in our mind, there's a lot of stuff you can tinker around within here. We tend not to mess with a lot of it. But the really key points you're going to see here, especially, is this JVM heap size limit, which on this is set to 8 gigs. I would generally, you're going to want to have this as at least 4, okay? And generally what we do is we don't have a hard and fast rule to what to set this to. We kind of play around with it. So we have a big client, a really big pharmaceutical company that we work with where, excuse me, I was talking with kind of our lead architect on that, and he was talking about their process of tuning this specifically to improve dashboard performance, and that what they ended up doing was kind of incrementally stepping their way up to 32 gigs. And at 32, it was really good. And then they actually fine-tuned it a little further to where they're not quite at 32, but almost at 32. And that seemed to be the sweet spot for their environment and their use cases. So that's what I would recommend you do, is you start incrementing this up and seeing what impact it has on your performance. Now, this is really going to help you, in my mind, with dashboards in particular, because what dashboards are going to do, when you open up a dashboard, it's going to fire off a ton of concurrent queries, because each visualization in a dashboard has its own query, or tends to have its own query at least. And so it's going to fire off a bunch of concurrent queries that are all going to get processed. And so making sure that you have an appropriate setting here is really going to help. Now, Jitendra asks, does incrementing the JVM, does that affect navigation slowness? No, I would not expect this to impact navigation slowness. This is really just looking at the query execution, Cognos' ability to query data from a database, pull that data back, and then prepare the data to hand off to the Cognos services that visualize the data, or to send it on to the Cognos UI to be visualized in the UI in the browser if you're using any of the Cognos 11 studios. It's an important distinction to make between kind of the Cognos 11 and Cognos 10 world. Is in the Cognos 10 world, everything was rendered on the server and then sent to the browser as an image. In Cognos 11, what you're looking at is more of a browser side rendering. So what the query service is doing is it's preparing the data, and then it's sending a data payload to your browser, which is being rendered in the browser. And this is why one of the things, when people are like, oh, Cognos is slow, sometimes the problem is your user's computer, especially if they're using dashboards, say, right? Because there's actually a lot of local processing that has to go on in the browser in order to render dashboard objects. And that wasn't the case in classic Cognos. So in Cognos 10, if you're having performance problems, the only place that you needed to look was on the Cognos servers. Now you do need to look at, well, what is your user doing, right? And honestly, when I was, expressing my pleasure at my new processor a little earlier, one of the problems I had when live streaming and demoing Cognos, and I'm sure you guys heard me say this, is like with my 2015, i5 6600K, even with my overclock applied to it, I had 4 cores and 4 threads, and Cognos would actually contribute to my CPU hitting 100% max, and Cognos would slow down because of the rendering that was happening in my browser. So that's definitely something you want to look at, that you may not think of, because classically that just wasn't something we had to take into account, but now it is, right? But this is a key setting. Now we're going to return to this screen in a little while when we start talking about the compute service, or the Flint service, and what that does. So all of this is interesting, and this type of stuff, if you're a longtime cognoid, you're really good at this. You kind of live and breathe this sort of thing. One of the things that we've done at PM Square, we have a lot of customers who there's kind of two groups of people, primary groups of people. There's Cognos people who don't know any of this stuff and need this education, and there's people who do know it and are sick of dealing with it. And that is why, at PM Square, we recently launched a managed analytics services program where we take care of this stuff for you. So we kind of become your admin, and we come in and proactively do all this tuning and make sure all these settings are set up. So that's something some of you may be interested in, and if you are, reach out to us. But, all the deep dive stuff I'm going through today is kind of part of that program, and we take it off your hands and do it for you. Okay. Other things to look at. So one of the big things, Catherine's asking recommended browsers for dashboards. So I use, I think I'm using Firefox right now. My go-to browser is the Brave browser, which is a Chromium browser. It's basically Chrome. It's just kind of got good privacy features. But I would use probably Chrome as a default, or Firefox. are going to be, in my experience, your best bets. Most people I know use Chrome. Okay, let's see. So another thing, just a classic problem that people have is that it'll just be like, we'll get a call and it'll be like, Ryan, Cognos is going crazy. Like it's acting all weird. Like queries aren't running. People can't log in. Like what's going on? One of the most common things when that starts happening is actually that your install drive is full. Right. So the best practice is generally to have your OS drive and then your drive that Cognos is installed on, right? So in this case, you can see I've got local disk C, which is where the OS is installed, and then data is actually where the Cognos installation is. And if you just look at the properties of this, you can see how much available space there is. And this will start to fill up with dump files and temp files and data sets and all sorts of stuff that Cognos is accumulating over time. And when this fills up, everything is going to go bonkers. And so if you're ever in a situation where everything is going bonkers, one of the first places I would check is here and just say, am I running out of free space on the Cognos install directory? And if the answer is yes, what you're going to need to do is take Cognos offline, and you're going to need to look at some ways to free up space here. And we're going to walk through how to do that right now. But I will tell you multiple times in my career, both as a consultant and back when I was on the kind of customer side of the house, I've had this happen. And once it happens to you one time, you know to always look for it. Just when suddenly everything's going bad, this is one of the primary culprits for that. So I would check that. Now, what do you want to do in that situation? All right, here's what you're going to want to do. There's in the Cognos install directory, there are a couple places that you're going to want to look to try to clear this up, okay? So the first one is going to be the temp folder, right? And in the temp folder, you can come in here and basically the classic thing you would say is just delete all of this, right? So this is going to just accumulate more and more stuff over time. It can wind up being pretty big. And you can come in and blast it, and Cognos will rebuild the directories in here and everything as necessary. So I've definitely seen cases where this folder gets huge. And clearing it out is a good practice. Now, like I said, you're going to need to take Cognos offline to do this, okay? So one of the kind of overall practices that we would recommend you do is schedule this. Like, hey, every Friday we do this. That sort of thing. I see Chad saying on Windows they had a monitor that would warn if the storage of the drive, right? So if you can proactively set this up. Disable JVM dumps could be an option, right? All of that is stuff that you're going to want to monitor. Now, here's the thing that I actually didn't know till today, when our friend Paul clued me into it, is that when you upload extensions, what's going to happen? Like, say you upload the Cogbox, okay? So for those of you who don't know, the Cogbox is like Cognos Paul takes all the cool stuff he builds. We put it into a free utility that we have available called the Cogbox. If you go to pmsquare.com, you can check it out. A lot of amazing stuff. And a further plug, next Thursday, Paul and I will be doing a live stream together to unveil the 2021.1 Cogbox release, which is going to have some really cool new features that I know you guys are going to love. Okay, with that said, when you upload the Cogbox, check out this extensions folder. There are going to be things like, here it is, right? So this is the Cogbox. So when you come in and delete temp, you can't just delete everything anymore. You need to not delete this extensions folder. Otherwise, you're going to cause problems with the uploaded extensions. So a little pro tip, I didn't even know that until today. I put up a call for like, hey, what are certain things I should be sure to tell people? And Paul was like, crucial you tell them this. So this extensions folder, don't delete it when you're deleting temp. Okay, other things you might want to delete, the data folder. Okay. The data folder is going to contain a lot of things that get data related things. But one of the things that's going to come in here is if you go to data files, data set cache, these are the data files. These are your like data sets. Okay. So how do data sets work? They're stored. Everybody knows. Well, probably not everybody knows, but a lot of people know. Oh, data sets or uploaded Excel files are stored in the content store. When a user makes a request, the query service says, "Do I have a local copy of the data set that the user request is referencing?" If yes, it will pull the local copy. If no, it will fetch a copy, the copy from the content store, and it will put it here, okay? And then it will load it into memory. These are Apache Parquet files. It will load the Parquet file into memory, and all the querying will go against that memory, right? This is why they're so fast. So here's what's going to happen, though. Let's say someone uploads an Excel file, and this works for data sets and Excel files. They're exactly the same under the hood. There's no difference. Someone uploads an Excel file. They mess around with it for 20 minutes. They forget about it. They never touch it again. It's going to sit here forever. So you're going to want to start to monitor this as well for copies of data sets that appear here, uploaded Excel files that appear here. It's just going to start filling up with stuff. This is another location I would look to delete. The third thing that people sometimes delete is they'll go ahead and they will, and this is, I generally delete this, is they delete the logs. So the logs eventually can fill up and have a lot of stuff in them. And you may not want to retain them. You may want to retain them. A lot of the places I've worked, we also delete this. And all of that, you'd be amazed at how much space you can fill up by deleting these directories. Now I see Robert says put temp and data on a separate drive. Absolutely, right? There's a lot of things you can do. Martin, IBM, why did you put this into temp? Great question. Why did you put it into temp, IBM? Okay. So that's one thing definitely you want to make sure you want to do. So what we've covered so far is like baseline. I configured Cognos, and what am I going to look at? Oh, I see Randy's comment there. Okay. What do we, settings you're going to want to set when you first turn on Cognos, things you're going to want to tune. Cognos starts acting funky, regular maintenance you want to do, big culprits to look at there. Now, when people say, well, I still, I did all that and something is still slow, particularly related to queries, my big recommendation at that point is, well, have you considered building a data set? Okay. So I'll build one really quick because I know a lot of you guys know what they are, but I've already saw one person in the chat say, hey, I'm new to Cognos, and they had a question. So let's say you're querying the database and the report's still slow, the dashboard's still slow. One thing you can do one thing you can do is create a data set. And what a data set is, it's kind of hidden. This really dries. So, you'd create a data set. I click the new button. There's no data set, right? What a data set is I mentioned that Parquet process earlier and where those files get stored. That's what a data set is. It's a Parquet file, which is, a big data file type. It's very common. If you build a data lake for analytics purposes, you're probably storing it in Parquet files, that's what's going on here. You have the ability to create those in Cognos. And the way you create those, if I go to my team content and let's just go down to samples and let's take a look at ye olde go sales query package. Okay, so now I have the option to create a data set. And at this point, what you can do, you can see here I have access to all the namespaces in my package. Think of these as the tables in your database. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take stuff from different tables that I might be interested in. So maybe I want to report on retailers. So let's take retailer type, and let's take the say, then we want to report on regions. and the retailer name. Okay. And then I also want to know what product lines do the retailers carry of ours, and what product types do they carry. And then, we got sales data. Let's just grab all of this good stuff. Okay. And drop that in there. What I'm doing is I'm taking stuff from 3 tables, I'm combining it into 1 table, and then I'm going to load this into that Parquet file, which will get loaded into memory. It's going to give me really fast performance. Let's imagine I had a report, it joined these 3 tables together, the performance was bad. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to create this data set, and there's a lot of features in here. I won't get into them for the sake of this demonstration, but we'll choose save and load data. And now I'll save this into my content, and I'll call this, really swell data set. I'm not sure why that's appearing on the screen. It probably has to do with SwordSoft. But we'll just deal with it for now. Troubleshooting on a live stream is a big no-no, right? So you see I get this message. It's loading. Right now it's executing a query against the database. It's pulling that data back, creating the Parquet file, housing it in the content store. That's what's going on right now, okay? This is my go-to, like, hey, I want my performance to be better move. I tell people to do this all the time. I have had great results with this. My clients have had great results with this as far as improving performance is concerned, and also simplifying presentations. So when people say, hey, Cognos is slow, this is one of my go-to ways to fix that and make Cognos less slow, okay? Now, what if these are slow, okay? What if, that's cool. So you can see the data set was loaded successfully. I can now build a dashboard off of it. And that dashboard is going to have probably going to have screaming performance compared to, at least in my example, the poor performance going against the database, okay? Now, would I always do this? Is this always faster than the database? No, you need to figure that out. But a lot of times this is kind of a magic bullet that solves the problem of, hey, this is slow. You get just the data you need. You get it into a data set. Boom, there you go. Okay, so what if these are slow? That's the question. Ryan, what if my data set is slow? Well, there are some things we can do about that. So let's hop back over to Cognos Administration. We're in the Query Service settings. If we go into the Query Service Advanced settings, you're going to see we don't have anything in here. Now, if I choose Override the settings acquired from the parent entry, I can start to set the Query Service Advanced settings. And this is where you control the settings available to data set processing. This is sometimes called the compute service. That's what it's called. But when you look at the documentation or the settings, it's often referred to as Flint, okay? So when you hear something talking about Flint or the compute service, it's the same thing. And this is where you access them. And what you'll find, and let me just pop this guy open. Where did that go? So what you'll find, here is the settings for the compute service. So I'm going to drop this into chat for you guys. I see the question about Snowflake. Snowflake is sweet. We love Snowflake at PM Square. I'm going to drop this into the chat for you guys. This is where you set the params for the process that governs the compute service, which is what processes data sets. So the big thing you're going to look at here is this one. It's exactly the same with the query service where we were setting that Java max heap size. We're going to set the same thing here, okay? So the QS query execution Flint server max heap. Of course, I don't expect you to remember that. I don't remember that. But we paste it in here. And then we can set a value. The default is what is it? 4 gigs. I often bump this up, right? So it's to 81, whatever it is. I was a theater major, for those of you who don't know, so I literally cannot do math in my head. But you bump this up, and that will give you more memory available for data set processing. So if your data sets are slow, this is where you go to change that. So, maybe you set this to, I don't know, not 16. Maybe you set this to 16,000 or something like that, right? 8 times 10, 24. Yes. Right. So you bump this up, and that gives you more memory available for processing these data sets. There's other settings you can set in here. I generally haven't messed around with them a whole lot. I haven't found that it's necessary to. One would be the maximum number of threads the compute service can use to service queries, right? So the specified value must be greater than 1. Now, I don't know, is there a default value? Like if you don't set this, I think it's an unlimited number of threads. That's my belief. I don't know that for sure. Maybe someone in chat does. So I generally don't set this. Like this, I think is just setting a max number that the Spark service will not go over, rather than specifying how many it can use. There's also this extra Java options where you can provide additional arguments. If anyone knows of a cool additional argument to set, please let me know. I don't know of any, but I know that that's an option there. So there may be some other cool things that we can uncover as a community that you can do to further tune this. But this is a big thing I do too. So, reports are slow. Look at a data set. Look at a data set. Then, if the data set's slow, come in and tune this. Now, I see that there's a comment here. 11.7 has made changes to its use of Flint. Not recommended to change this anymore at your risk. So that's an interesting piece of feedback, because I have done this a lot. And if I should undo it, I'm going to need a good reason to know why. So maybe we should touch base after the live stream if you want to provide more details there on why that would be, or what the change is that makes it you no longer recommend doing this. I'm very intrigued by that, because this is something I've been doing a lot. And so it'd be good to know. I know a lot of people have been doing this, so it'd be good to know why we shouldn't mess with it if that is indeed the case. Okay. The final thing you can check out if you're looking at data sets and you want to know what's going on a little further is there's actually a Spark SQL console you can look at to see what's happening when data sets are processed. So where you can look at this, if you go into the configuration folder, you don't rename it, you open it, and then you want to do a search for, what is it, Flint? Just do a search for Flint, and you'll see this Flint app properties file. You edit this with Notepad++. Now, and you see this Flint Spark UI disabled. By default, this says true. Okay? Which means you cannot access the Spark console that is running under the scenes to process data sets. If you set this to false, and then you restart Cognos, you will have access to the Spark console. Now, the recommendation is don't just leave this on all the time. Just turn it on if you really need to look at what's going on there, and then turn it off when you don't need to anymore. That's what I would recommend. So if you set this to false, you reboot Cognos, and then you go to port 4040 on your local host, and here you can see the actual Spark console that the actual, you can look at the Spark jobs that are running your data set. So this right here, you can see what's going on, the different data sets, the duration of the Spark jobs, whether or not they succeeded or failed. I'm not really a Spark guy, so I can't, I've messed around in this a little bit. You can see the actual SQL queries related to the data sets, all of that good stuff, right? So here is that, here is when I just built that data set. Remember, it was region and retailer and product type and that sort of stuff. Here you can see the actual SQL that was executed, the Spark SQL that was executed. So here's another place when you're trying to tune data sets, understand what's going on with them. You really want to dig under the hood. This is where you can go to do it. Now, this is a, use at your own risk thing. I wouldn't leave it on at all times. I would just turn it on when necessary to look at it, and then probably turn it off. But there you go. There's also a place where you can turn on Flint logging if you want to look at start logging this sort of stuff into the Cognos logs. And that would be if you go into, let me pop this guy open. So if you go into the Manage menu under Configuration, Diagnostic Logging, if you click Show All, you'll see you have this Flint option. So if you click this, it will start creating, putting Flint. It will start adding data set information to the logs. Now, what specific logs and how does it handle that? I'm not 100% certain, but I know it does it. And so I would check that out as well. Okay. Worst infraction is not increasing the cores that Cognos uses for reporting interactive batch. Okay, so let's take a look at that real quick. So Alaric, I apologize if I'm pronouncing your name wrong, but I know you always add really helpful stuff here. So the worst infraction is not increasing the cores that Cognos uses for reporting. And all of that can be accessed in, via this, these menus here. Let me close out of this guy. So when you want to access like all of that stuff, like say the report service, for example, right? The report service settings, again, are available here. And if you look into the settings, you can see somewhere, maybe I'm forgetting where this is. Logging, or maybe it's up a level. In any case, it's in here, where you can set the number of cores available to Cognos for reporting for interactive and batch. So check that. Make sure you check that as well. So other things that you're going to want to do. One neat little performance hack has to do with what you see here. Where would it actually? You guys have moved this. Here we go. About has to do with this. So a lot of my customers stay a few releases behind, and that's not always wise. Like the 11.1.7 release featured a changes to the query service that really improved performance, like across the board. So I did a lot of testing internally, and I'd have something open in 11.1.6 and 11.1.7, and I'd make a visualization in a dashboard that took 15 seconds to load in 11.1.6, and it would take, 4 seconds to load in 11.1.7. I did the same thing with data sets. I know data sets were made faster in 11.1.7. So I'd look at it in 11.1.6 and 11.1.7. And, in one, the data set took 1.5 minutes to load, and the other, it took 12 seconds to load. So just by going to 11.1.7, you're probably going to see, if you're on CQ or dynamic query mode, or you're using data sets, I think you're going to see a performance improvement just by doing that. Now, if you're still using CQM, like if you haven't upgraded to DQM yet, you have no DQM content, I wouldn't expect to see a lot of performance improvements in general. All of that work is really being done on CQM, to my knowledge. Now, that might not be 100% true, but I haven't heard anything about like, hey, we're making CQM better. It's always DQM that's being made better. The next thing, so I would recommend, like, really, if you kind of have a maybe old school mentality of we want to stay behind, we don't want to be on the newest release. Being on the newest release sometimes comes with significant performance benefits. And also, all the bug fixes for the release you're on are available in the newest release. So that's another reason to go to it, right? Like the bugs you have today are only going to be solved in a future Cognos release. So the next thing, what should you do when you're to make that process as easy and smooth as possible? Well, one big thing you're going to want to do, if we go back into the system here, is you're going to want to take a look at the preserve.txt file. So if you are doing customizations to Cognos and you want to do an over-the-top upgrade, which we frequently do, we don't always do. It depends on the environment, how complicated the environment is. But you want to do an over-the-top upgrade. What you're going to want to do is look in the config folder, and then in the preserve file, you'll see these two files: CA preserve, base preserve, and preserve. Don't mess with CA base preserve, okay? Leave that unchanged. But the preserve file, you're going to want to look at this. And here you can see all of the directories that are not being messed with when you upgrade, right? So you put a directory or a file in here, and Cognos, when you do the over-the-top upgrade, these are the things that it's not going to mess with, okay? So really, an important thing that can make your upgrade life easier, because the alternative is, well, you take a backup of all the files that you need, and then you re-import them, the directories that you need, you re-import them, you do all that sort of stuff. So this can really help you with that. You also, I mean, a lot of our consultants, I was talking to them and they're like, well, I still take a backup of all the files anyway, because I just want to be safe, right? I want to make sure that I didn't forget something in the preserve file, or I didn't accidentally do anything like that. I see a question here. What did you say about fix pack 11.7? So the fix packs, yeah, the fix pack. I mean, I would definitely do the fix packs. There's no, it's just bug fixes in the fix packs. No new features. There are some, I mean, like new features, there's some, I think, changes to like certain data sources that make them work better, or updates to them, but nothing in terms of new features. New features are going to be coming in 11.2, which is kind of, I don't know a release date for yet. Fingers crossed soon. I don't know if anybody on from IBM is watching and wants to drop some, you guys probably can't share it with us anyways, but I would definitely go to FixPack 2 if you're on 11.17, but you're not going to get any new features out of it, just some good bug fixes. Sonia, every time Sonia says something in these live chats, it's always like great info. So write it down. But what Sonia says there, backups in case you need to do a clean install, right? All your modifications in one folder structure so you can drop on top is a clutch move there. Other things that you're going to want to do. So when it comes to making sure your Cognos environment is healthy, I mean, one thing that people don't think about as much as they should is, can I remember I know I opened this, but I probably opened it in Brave. It's like, can I remember the URL to my own application? Is it Thrive-Demo? What is it? pmsquare.com. The one thing that people don't think about enough, yeah, it is like keeping their environment healthy in terms of like, what are people actually doing in there, and are they using the content, and what should we do with the content that they aren't using? So there's a lot of stuff you can do here. Oh, come on, you guys. Let me turn this off. Show keystroke. Dolley at pmsquare.com. There we go. Okay. So this is really good. I know some of you have seen this, some of you haven't, but this is really useful for just like, one, knowing what's going on in your environment from two perspectives. What's in the environment, and what's happening with my performance, right? So like, is your performance getting better or worse over time, right? You don't have a great, you may not have a great handle on that, but you come into Thrive and you can see here's your average wait time, which is like interactive executions, and here's your average batch runtime, which is, of course, batch execution. So you can track this over time. I have a customer on Thrive who suddenly started having Cognos issues last week, and it was very interesting how we could come in here and Thrive and like really pinpoint it. They were like, well, we started noticing problems on Friday, and it was like, yep, there it is, right? Their average execution time went through the roof starting Friday morning, their average wait time, rather. So, you know, keeping on top of what's going on in my environment. Are people using it? Are they using the features? Are they using the content? So if I go to the reporting view here, here's all the content in the environment, and I can really drill into, say how many executions have people viewed, or saved output views. This is an important one. If you're saving a lot of output in content, or saving a lot of output in Cognos, you know, that can start to clutter up the content store, cause all sorts of problems. Here you can see the saved output views. Are people actually viewing the saved output from the reports that I have? Right? We're tracking all of that, and all of that comes into play when it comes to creating a healthy content store. You don't want 10 years worth of old PDFs in your content store clogging everything up. You really don't. So here you can see, are people viewing the saved output, all sorts of that stuff. Now, there are a few other things that you can do, you know, and Thrive will also help you maintain a healthy environment in terms of letting you know what issues are happening in your environment. Like if there are a lot of errors being triggered, for example, here you can see these stability issues are all reoccurring errors that are happening in the environment. Here, this one, you can see XQE PLN 0153. It's happened on 18 unique reports. 45 unique users have experienced it. If I click on it, I can see every time the error occurred. So it happened a lot here. Which application server did it happen on? Each individual event of the error. Like when did it happen? Which report did it happen to? Which user experienced it? So you can really get a lot of knowledge out of this when it comes to keeping your Cognos environment healthy. Now, if you do discover, I have a lot of unused content. I have a lot of stuff in my environment that I want to clean out. What sort of things can you do? So one thing I would recommend is, especially if you're saving a lot of content, is to consider using an external object store. Now, what that is instead of saving report views, rather PDFs, and that sort of stuff into the content store, you can come into Cognos Connection, or Cognos Configuration rather. And what is it under? Should be under, what is it, data access? It's somewhere in here. Yeah, data access, content manager, and then here, I think you can set the external, there it is. So the content manager, content store, you can create what's called an external object store. And what that's going to do is it's going to save all those things to like a disk location, your saved PDFs, all of that stuff to a disk location instead of the content store. What I would really like is for IBM to let me save this to an S3 bucket. That would be cool. But right now you can save it off the disk, so it's saved to a disk rather than in your content store. It gives you much better, prevents it from cluttering up the content store. The other thing you can do if you really want to start to clean up your content store, and this is sometimes playing with fire, but what you can do is run the Cognos consistency check. So what that's going to do is, let's close out of this guy. What that's going to do is if you go into Cognos config, and you look under, I never remember where this is, so I write it down. Under content administration, you see this job, consistency check. So there's two things you can do, right? You can do a consistency check and get like a report that will tell you find inconsistent objects in Cognos. So what that will do is what it's really looking for, like a big thing it's looking for is orphaned objects. So someone created a schedule or created a report and they left the company, we removed them from Active Directory, and now there's no owner in Cognos, right? When they get removed from AD, they get removed from Cognos. Their My Folders go into like the land of wind and ghosts where you can recover the content, but it can be a real pain. And anything they owned becomes an orphan. I don't know why I'm using this chopstick for emphasis, but anything they owned becomes an orphan object. That's like not a problem until it's suddenly a huge problem. Like if you do a namespace migration, the orphaned objects can cause you nightmares, right? So if you run the consistency check, it will identify all of that stuff. It will identify orphaned schedules is a big one, because a lot of times if you allow people to schedule their own stuff, and then they leave the company, they are no longer in Active Directory, all those schedules are still running, and like you want them turned off. And that will help you identify those. Thrive will also identify that. So Thrive will identify schedules that are running that it appears nobody's interacting with, so you can turn them off. But this will help you with that as well. Now, when you run the consistency check, it will tell you what those objects are. And then when you say, okay, fix consistency problems, it is going to delete all of that stuff. So let's just imagine that you have a really important report for the finance department that was built by a financial analyst who left the company, and that's now an orphaned object, and now you say fix consistency, it is going to delete that report. So do not fix consistency until you have gone through the orphans and made sure that the important orphans are assigned a new owner. This is a feature that that we're going to be adding into a future release of Thrive, where it will automatically give you an orphan report and give you automatic options to like, okay, assign owner, right? So you'll see all the orphans and you can say, okay, I want to assign these orphans to whomever. But let me repeat, do not run the consistency check, fix consistency, unless you know that everything that's going to be deleted is good. Because you get yourself in trouble by deleting a lot of important stuff. So these are important things, in general. You want to keep your content store. You don't want stuff in it. So, having your folders having your saved content in an object store can help you fight content store bloat. Making sure that you don't have unneeded objects, whether that's saved versions or anything like that in Cognos, making sure you don't have old PDFs that you don't need to retain, reports, even if nobody is running them. They are taking up space in the content store. There's no reason to retain them if you don't need them. Running this consistency check, using something like Thrive to make sure you only have this stuff that you need. Occasionally, I've seen situations where people like in say you have a SQL Server content store, you've got a limit on SQL Server set. How big can it get? And you run, like, you don't maintain your content store, and you run into the limit where like suddenly SQL Server is out of space. The content store has run into whatever the DBA set as like the maximum allowable database size. I've had that happen. So keep your content store small, keep it lean. Only the stuff you need in Cognos should be in Cognos. And again, my request for IBM is that object store, let me do it there. And also it would be awesome if you would let me store my data sets in S3. That would be really cool too. I know you can use S3 for report output. Let's just take the next two steps. Give me an S3 object store and let me store data sets by default in S3. Chef's kiss. Okay. Is Thrive also coming with version control? No, probably not. So one of the things that we do with Thrive is, we're a really close Modio partner too. So we try not to put things into Thrive that you can get Modio. And so our recommendation, if you want version control, is going to be Modio CI. I see Greg saying hashtag backup. Yes, back up the content store before you do anything to the content store, always. And if you want to, you can see this content archival. You have options in here to set up content store backups. So it's a good practice to regularly back up the content store just in general. You can do that by doing like regular content exports of your content. And you can also just take, images of the content store database through your database management software to handle it that way. All right. So that covers the list of things that I wanted to go over. I was trying to really run the gamut from stuff that I know someone like Martin Otto knows in his sleep, but a newbie to Cognos might not know, to stuff that I feel like not many people know, like, well, how to access the Spark console in Cognos. I see. So that's what I was trying to cover. So that covers my prepared content. I think what we'll do, we've gone over an hour. We'll go ahead and wrap things up there. I'm seeing William's question. I'm just getting not a Parquet file when running a report from a data set and distribute environment in FP2. No, I haven't heard of that one. I have not heard of that one, William. If you have filed a ticket with IBM for that, why don't you just shoot me an email, rdolly@pmsquare.com, with some info about that. If you end up getting resolved, or if you have a ticket number, I'd be interested to know what's going on with that. Okay. So, So with that said, I'm going ahead and wrap things up here. I guess the last thing to plug, let me just see. So events for PM Square. So today, February 16th, top tips for a healthy Cognos. February 25th, make sure to catch our Cogbox new release live stream. So it's the 2021.1 release of Cogbox. It's got some very cool new features. My favorite is a feature, and I know everybody has been screaming for this. It allows you to edit custom tables and data modules. So you can add tables, remove tables, change custom table definitions. You can't do that today. It's very painful to change custom tables and data modules today. This release of Cogbox will make it a piece of cake. So you're definitely going to want to check that out. That's on the 25th. It'll be Paul and I coming at you live. Me from Detroit, Paul from Israel. We'll both be on camera. My new computer can handle it. So you'll get video of us both. And you will, don't be sure to catch that. It's going to be a lot of fun, and you guys are going to love what's coming in that version. And then the final thing I would recommend, again, if what you saw today is interesting, but it's not the type of thing, either you don't want to learn it, you don't have time to learn it, you would like someone else to do it for you, or you do know how to do it and you're sick of doing it, you would like to focus on building cool stuff in Cognos and not on, your inability to remember how to multiply the various levels of memory that you should set the query service to. Reach out to us for a managed analytics offering. It's something that a lot of our customers are taking advantage of to offload this administrative stuff to someone who really understands Cognos deeply and will take care of it proactively for you. So with that said, I want to thank you guys for coming, and everybody stay safe out there, stay healthy, and we'll see you next week on February 25th at 1 p.m. Eastern for the Cogbox live stream. Check us out at pmsquare.com. Lots of good stuff on our blog, as always. Stay in touch. Stay in touch with me. You can, last thing, connect with me on LinkedIn. I post lots of Cognos content on LinkedIn. I'm happy to connect to people. So connect to me on LinkedIn, and we'll see you next week on the 25th for another PM Square live stream. So with that said, take care, everybody, and I will see you next week. Bye.